pelvic floor and reproductive health release. So things that will be really helpful, like for PMS, for periods, if you have any kind of leakage in the pelvic floor, all of that. So you'll need 2 MFR balls for this practice. All right, so we're actually going to find 2 spots to release to begin with. So your pelvic floor, real quick, is just an intra-abdominal pressure system. So think of everything from your diaphragm to your pubic bone. So all of that is interconnected. So that's what we're going to focus on trying to release, because what often people do when they've got leakage or other issues is Kegels, which is just adding more tension to a system that's probably already under a lot of tension. So we're going to really find something to soften into and encourage the system to relax. So your main focus will be your breath. But I want to show you, because we'll be on our bellies for the first 2, where we're going. So with your myofascial release balls, the first spot is going to be right inside your frontal hip bone. So right inside your ASIS. And then the next spot is going to come about in an inch and down an inch. So you're going to be literally right above the pubic bone and closer together. So right in front of the hip bone. So if you palpate for those, you can feel those. And then about down an inch and in an inch to being right above the pubic bone. So those 2 areas are where we're going to be on our bellies. So just so you kind of have an idea of where we're going. When you're ready, go ahead and come into a prone position on the belly. Let's find, oops, I just threw my ball. Let's find our first spot. It's going to be right inside the ass, and then lower your hips back down. Now you can come up onto the forearms, which can be really nice. You can also lay and stack your hands and let your forehead rest on your arms. However feels comfortable for you. But make sure you're inside the bone. So if the balls feel like they're on the bone, just bring them in. Even just a little millimeter can make a big difference. And what we're going to want to focus on here is deep breathing. Now you may notice as you start to take a deep breath in, so I'll invite you first, take a deep breath in and out. Now on this next deep breath, notice where your inhale ends. And let that go. Could you feel your inhale all the way down to the pelvic floor? Or did it feel like it stopped somewhere in the belly? So again, that's just feedback. If you're not feeling your in-breath past the belly into the pelvic floor, that's probably just a sign that your pelvic floor is really tight and needing some release, especially if you have any kind of painful periods or leakage issues. Then this can be a really helpful way to release that system. So again, take an in-breath. Notice where the breath ends. And ideally, a full, healthy intra-abdominal pressure system, it'll be able to go all the way to the pelvic floor. And it's okay if it doesn't. It's good. It gives you feedback, something to work on. Make sure your glutes are soft. You're not squeezing through the glutes. And just keep noticing that breath, trying to breathe all the way down to the pelvic floor. And you may notice the longer we stay and breathe, maybe the breath is getting closer towards the pelvic floor if it wasn't there before. And again, if it's the first time you've ever done this and it's not anywhere close, that's okay. Again, just gathering information, noticing how our personal bodies feel. And if it's not something you feel in the pelvic floor, maybe this is a therapeutic modality you can come back to and keep working at, finding this release for this system. But the pelvic floor is more than just the base of the pubic area. It's connected to everything around it, the hips, the diaphragm. And Kegels are not a cure-all. It would be like holding a bicep curl, which we did yesterday afternoon in class. So if you were there or if you've done it, remember what it felt when we held that 90-degree hold for 30 seconds. So imagine if that's your pelvic floor health, if it's under that tension for that extreme amount of time, how that might feel. And so then you could see why there might be leakage. It's a system that needs to relax instead of being tense. So if Kegels are your go-to, maybe this might be your new go-to instead. Now we're going to move into our second spot. So in an inch and down an inch, right above that pubic bone. So when you're ready, if you were on your elbows, go ahead and lower down just so you can slide the balls in an inch and down an inch. And this might be kind of tender, especially if you've never placed the balls here before. But again, we want to find a softening into it. So at first, if it's really tender, maybe see if a few deep breaths might encourage the muscles around the ball to soften. But if it stays or if it's unbearable, move them just a little bit until you find something that you can really soften into. But we're right above the pubic bone. And again, just focusing on that nice deep breath into the pelvic floor. And take another breath here. And then slowly just roll onto one side. Keep your balls close by, but just come to lay onto your back. And let your knees be bent with your feet on the floor. And notice now how that feels, this whole area, hopefully just more in tune as you found this gentle compression. And I'm going to invite you to kind of make your hands into like a V and gently just set it right there on the front of your hip region. And then we're just going to do some pelvic tilts here. So imagine tilting your pelvic downward so you kind of feel your fingers pointing more towards the floor and your low back is arching. And then we'll tilt the pelvis in the other direction. So it's like your fingertips are pointing more towards the sky and your low back is broadening onto the floor. Just moving through those two, and the hands are there for that tactile feedback to make sure the entire pelvic floor and hip region is moving in unison. Nothing's being left behind. And again, when we tilt it back with the low back broadening onto the floor, it's not really a bridge, so keep your hips really heavy and your tailbone still grounded. Again, use this as feedback for the pelvic floor and perhaps the mobility through the hips. Again, if something is really tight and doesn't feel like it can move quite well, that could again be feedback that that's something we want to focus on if we have any kind of issues with the pelvic floor. Often therapeutic modalities can be quite simple, and sometimes just inviting the body to release can be really helpful. Take one more round here. And then come back into a nice neutral position. And again, let's take a breath to gauge in. So take a nice deep inhale. And exhale. Now this time as you inhale, can you feel the breath all the way to your fingertips in this triangle shape on your hips? Or did the breath feel more stunted in the belly, or maybe it only made its way to the thumbs instead of all the way to the fingertips down at the pubic bone? So again, take another breath to notice. And again, if you notice the breath doesn't make it all the way to the fingertips, that's okay. It's just good feedback that finding this release through these 3 techniques we've done so far might be really beneficial to your pelvic floor. We're going to find one more release, and it's going to be right around the sit bone. So go ahead and come up to have a seat, taking your balls with you. Now, if you lean onto one hip, we can kind of palpate. So if you take your hand to your glute and you kind of palpate around, you'll feel this bone that kind of feels really pointy. So that's your sit bones. We're going to come just underneath the sit bone. So when you find that bony protrusion in the glutes, just right underneath of it. So it's not on the hamstring and it's not on the bullseye of the butt, but it's right in between the two. And that's where we're going to place both balls. So placing it under one sit bone and then kind of hiking up the hip to palpate on the other side and then having a seat. Now the hands can be behind you. The more we lean back, the less body weight will be into the ball and the sit bones. The more you lean forward, a little bit more intensity. So find that kind of sweet spot where you feel a little bit of feedback, but you can still take nice deep breaths. It's definitely not painful. And then again, take those few deep breaths and notice, can you breathe all the way into where the pubic bone is connecting with the floor? Or does the breath feel stunted before it gets all the way to its bottom point? Take one more deep breath here. And then slowly release. Go ahead and slide the balls out from underneath of you. Set them off to the side. And we're just going to do one more check-in. Come all the way down back onto your back. Again, maybe knees bent, maybe legs straight, but make that triangle shape with the hands, placing that right on the front of the hips, like your palms are resting on the hip bones and your fingertips down at the pubic bone. And take a deep breath in and notice if the breath has gotten any deeper into the belly. And let's do two more just to gather in this information. And release. You can come up to have a seat if that feels comfortable, or feel free to stay on the floor as you are. So again, these were just a few helpful modalities to check in with your pelvic floor. They can be really helpful to do right before a period to ease with cramps and flow. So if you're still having your menstrual cycle, that can be really helpful. It can also be helpful when you're on your menstrual cycle to release through pain. But if you have any pelvic floor issues, leakage, or anything of that sort, this might be really helpful to see if your whole intra-abdominal pressure system is working the way that it should. Thank you so much for joining me for class today. Have an amazing rest of your day, and until next time, be well.